So we know all of our primitives come with UVs already, but what happens if we edit our primitive or need to make something else? Let's focus on our cube here because it's a pretty simple example. So I'm going to select it and hit slash on my number pad to look at just that and exclude everything else from the viewport. Then I'll hit tab to go into edit mode, and once everything is selected, we can see our UVs here that we've already been looking at. But again, what happens if we need to edit this? Let's say we need to add some edge loops here. I'll hit Control R, left click to place that edge loop, and as we slide this around, then this works great because there's an option for correct UVs here. If we uncheck that, then things get messed up, but of course we want to keep that on when we're adding edge loops, and that works fine. But let's say we need to grab an edge and move it. Well, if we grab, let's see, these two edges here, grab that along the x-axis, then we're really going to stretch these UVs out. Or if we need to inset and extrude, let's say we take our face, this front face here, hit I to inset, and E to extrude inwards, then again we're going to stretch those UVs. You can see that especially on these little plus icons, that just get stretched all the way from the front to the back. Now there is an option to help us get over this problem at least a little bit, and that is under Options if you're in edit mode, and Correct Face Attributes. So if you turn that on, and let's say we have a face here, we can hit E to extrude that, and it's going to give us additional UVs that match what we had before. So we could go ahead and move this face around, do whatever we need to, and it's going to fix those UVs as we work. So that is incredibly cool, but I'm actually going to recommend you leave this off almost all the time. So if you need to make a few quick edits and you're working with a pretty boxy shape or something, then this can definitely be helpful, and I'd encourage you to use it in some situations. Again, in places like this, it works great, but then if we do an inset and hit E to extrude, then that one doesn't quite work as well. But for a lot of simple edits, this is awesome. However, the reason I recommend leaving it off is it can very easily mess us up unintentionally. Because let's say we have our UVs set up the way that we want to, and we move our geometry with G and just move it like that, then you can see our UVs continually get messed up. Same thing with scaling or rotating. We can very quickly just destroy any hard work that we've done. So I'd recommend leaving that off, and that way as we scale or rotate our geometry or do anything else, at least all of the UVs are going to stay the same and be predictable. Instead of that, what I'd recommend doing is unwrapping things manually. So what we can do to unwrap something, to create a two-dimensional representation of whatever it is that we're looking at, we can just select a face, go to UV, and unwrap. And that's going to take that face and just project it based on the normal right into the UV editor. So it's going to be the exact same shape. So even if we have a strangely shaped one like this, we can go to UV and unwrap, and the UV is going to be exactly that shape. So that's very nice, and we can do that for a group of faces as well. So if we have faces that are selected, for example, all of these sides here, we can select all three of them, hit U and unwrap, U being the hotkey for the UV menu. So these are exactly the same, but from now on, I'll just hit U on my keyboard because I'm so used to it and it's very, very fast. So I'll hit U and unwrap, and here we have that two-dimensional representation right here, and they're all stuck together. So we can treat this as one island. I'll go to my island selection mode. So now I can move these around as one. But we don't have to stop our selection here on the face. We can actually continue this down onto the bottom. So even though we have a hard edge here, we can continue this selection all the way down and select both of these faces here. And as you can imagine, if we were just unfolding this like a piece of paper, then it would still make straight lines. So we could go U and unwrap, and that's exactly what happens. So if we select this shell and move this around, you can see how it's wrapping onto the bottom. And that works great. We can continue our selection all the way up here as well. I'll select those faces, U and unwrap. Now in the UV editor, these are one long continuous line of faces. What would cause us some problems though, is if we selected a face that connected these two ends of our selection. So let's say we take this face and this face, Right now in the UV editor, they're not connected at all except by this face underneath. But what happens if we select this face as well? Well, it's going to try to take both of these edges here. It's going to take this edge in the UV editor, and I'll turn on sync selection just so we can look at these edges. It's going to take this edge and that one and try to connect them with one face. But of course, right now, if we imagine a connection line, let's just use our annotate line tool. If we imagine a face connecting this, and we didn't move the UVs, it would just be one, kind of flat line. And obviously that wouldn't work. That's not going to be a good representation of our cube there. So what it would need to do is select these vertices. I'll turn sync selection off. It would take these vertices and it would need to bend them. Got to go to vertex select mode. It would need to grab them out like this, and then this could make a face like so. But of course, that's going to cause some warping. So as you can see in 3 dimensions, we can't just unwrap everything all at the same time. So if we hit U and unwrap, you'll see that warping exactly as described. Let's take all these faces again. Hit U and unwrap to get that nice straight line. But then if we select this one, it's going to cause warping right in that area as I mentioned. So U and unwrap, and you can see it tries to bend everything, try to keep things all connected, and in the process just really give us a lot of warping. So we need to be very careful about what's connected to what when it comes to our UVs, and that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later when it comes to seams. But just keep in mind that we want our UV islands to be as straight as possible, so we don't want to connect areas like this. So I'll unselect that face, hit U and unwrap to go back to what we had before. And another way to cause problems is to continue this selection all the way around. So let's say we connected it like that, hit U and unwrap. Again, that's going to cause some pretty spectacular warping because it's trying to create a circle out of this loop here. So I'll unselect that, hit U and unwrap again. Okay, so we have this section nicely unwrapped all the way through the bottom and stuff. So I'll move this off to the side here. And let's go ahead and unwrap this section here. We can just follow the faces all the way up and back down the other side. Okay, the bottom is already unwrapped, so we don't have to worry about that. So I'll take this, hit U and unwrap. Okay, so that works nicely. To get the rest of the faces that we haven't touched yet, I'll just take this one and that one, hit U and unwrap, and since they're not connected in the 3D view, they're not going to be connected in the UV editor. We also generally want some space between our shells here. Number one, so that they don't accidentally get stuck together. We have a default margin of 0.001, so they won't be stuck together by default, but we do at least want some room in between our shells. So I'll hit U and unwrap again, and just increase this margin a little bit by holding Shift. And that way it's very clear that they're independent islands like this. So I can take these, I'll select them like that, scale them down, place them off to the side. And are there any that we missed? Yep, there's some inside of here. You take those faces, hit U, and unwrap. And we can scale them down. Okay, so here we have our object nicely unwrapped, but we do have one problem, is that things are overlapping in the UV editor. So if we were to take our pen and try to draw something on this image, and we try to draw it on this face right here, which I believe is over here, it would end up on the face behind it as well. So if we have overlapping UVs, the same part of the image is going to appear on both. And sometimes this can be helpful. It can be nice to have, the same image on the right as on the left and just kind of save texture space that way. But generally it's not ideal, especially in areas like this. So what we want to do is lay out our UVs in a way that makes sense. So we could just select our islands here. Let's say we want to move this one off to the side. This one we can move over here. These we could move over here. And we could manually go around and just set these things into place. But there is a much faster way of doing this, and that is packing things automatically. The process of just laying these things out is called packing. And if we want to just do this automatically, we can select everything and go to UV and down to pack islands. And there we go. So it's not always going to be the most optimal solution. It's not the smartest algorithm in the world, but it does work for a lot of situations. If we expand the options here, we can tweak the margin until we have something that we like. And as you can see, this really, really long UV island is making it so that it can't really pack it that efficiently because it needs to take up the entire height. So maybe what I'd want to do is take these faces, I'll just take these, and maybe separate them out. So I can't hit G and just move this off to the side because it's still attached. So what I could either do is go to sync selection and just select these faces and then move them off to the side like so, or we could rip that area. So I'll turn off sync selection, select everything in the 3D viewport here, and instead take these faces and use the rip tool like this, the rip region, and then I can click and drag and move this off to the side. The hotkey for that is V, and it works in the 3D view very similarly. We talked about this in the fundamentals of mesh modeling, where if we select an edge and hit V, we can rip that off. And similarly with the UV editor, we can select a face that's connected, but we can just hit V and move that off to the side. Okay, so I'll hit Control Z and undo that, and we've separated these pieces out, and let's pack them again by selecting everything, going to our UV menu and pack islands. And there we go. Now, one issue that we may find is that one island, let's say we take this one and scale it down, and now it's not consistent with the other islands in the 3D view. So it's really hard to tell this in the UV editor because it's not exactly obvious how big these faces are in the 3D view. But now we can see these squares on this grid are a lot bigger than the squares on the grid on this face here. And that's because these faces are much smaller in the UV editor than these faces here. So we want them all to be proportional. And one easy way to do that is just to calculate it automatically by going to UV and average islands scale. So that's going to size everything in correct proportions, and then we can go ahead and pack this again. So UV and pack islands. And there we go.